Okay, we're going to talk about training specificity this week. So, for instance, some of the big things that are out there, usually that people see, is like powerlifting and like bodybuilding. Those are probably the two most common things. As my cat already wants attention. Yep, he knows we're recording. He's the star of the videos. Got to show up and tell you to get to the gym. Yes, I know. You always got to be in the videos. Yes, we're talking about training. Yeah, training specificity. Anyway, with things like powerlifting and bodybuilding, those are probably the two most common, or probably the top two that people think of when it comes to training. Because like powerlifting, you pretty much like lifting as much as possible and everything. Like if you think of like some of the world records, people are like squatting 1,000 pounds, they're deadlifting 800-900 pounds, and they're bench pressing at least 600-700 pounds or whatever. So in order to do that, like those are the big three. So like you kind of have to look at like get into like coaches where like, okay, this is how like you increase your bench press and everything. So like first and foremost, you pretty much like to get better at bench pressing, you have to bench press and everything. So you sit there and you work on like okay, obviously it's the barbell bench press, because that's where you can pretty much put on most of the weight and everything. So first off, like when you're first starting out, like maybe you can only bench 135 and you're like, oh man, I'm never going to do it. But by doing it, like you want to do like a volume and like a frequency. So like you sit there and try and train like 2 or 3 times a week. You're doing the bench press, like you also do use dumbbells. You do accessory work to help like build up like your triceps to help like with that and everything. Same thing like with squats. I mean, you do like of course it's the back squat, and so you do like the barbell back squats. You do like a belt squats. You use like a leg press. You use like accessory workout work with stuff like dumbbells and stuff like that to build up your squat and everything. And the same thing like with deadlift, the deadlift. So when you go into like a powerlifting meet, you can sit there and actually compete and everything and get up there into high levels. Same kind of concept with the bodybuilding. You're trying to like in a sense going for more aesthetics than you are pure strength versus like the powerlifting. Now, of course, another big thing is like yoga. Okay, do you like go purely yoga? So like you're sitting there focusing primarily on like mobility. Now, of course, like with the yoga, there is like stuff like Ashtanga, which is in a sense more focused on actual strength and everything. There's vinyasa, which is more based on like at least geared towards like the cardio, because like with vinyasa you're pretty much constantly moving from one pose to another. And of course then there's yin, which is like the most passive of them all, where you're sitting there and you're sitting in a pose for like 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes, and then you move to another pose and you sit there for like another 3 or 4 5 minutes or so. Now another thing is like you could quite possibly use all three, combine them, and then like go maybe gear towards more general health. And of course another thing that comes up is like, okay, well, what about cardio? Do you want to be a marathon runner? Compete in the Boston Marathon? And of course you also like with training specificity to get into that marathon, you wouldn't sit there and do necessarily just strength train, and like do like the push-pull leg splits and like just go into the gym and lift weights all the time and then expect to be able to run a marathon. You want to get like to be able to run a marathon, what you want to do is get on the elliptical, get on the treadmill, ramp yourself up, and start off with like maybe like you're just starting off and like you get gassed at running 1 mile, so maybe you start building yourself up to maybe like run a 5K. Okay, well now maybe you can run a 5K, and then like you feel winded, but then you build up that 5K time, so that way you can do it faster and faster, and then you build up to yourself to a 10K, and then maybe you do half a marathon, and you build yourself up to that full marathon and everything. So those are some of the big threes, like where you're kind of like in a sense going for like one specific thing, like with like lifting, with like the powerlifting or bodybuilding, you're doing exclusively like lifting. With yoga, you're doing exclusively mobility work. And then with like a marathon running, you're doing exclusively cardio. So it's like, okay, well, what do I go for? It's pretty much up to you. But like me, I tried for me, I tried to take like a more jack of all trades type of approach and be like well, like with each one, you would be like, in a sense, like an expert. Like, okay, for powerlifting, you might sit there and be able to like, say, squat 700 pounds and deadlift like 700 pounds, and then like bench press 400. So like you're with those three big lifts, you're being able to lift over 1,800 pounds and everything. So like, so you pretty much are at the expert level. The bodybuilding, of course, like I don't want I can use the Mr. Olympia as an example, but of course something like that you got to remember those guys that step on the stage for Mr. Olympia, like your Jay Cutlers, your Ronnie Coleman's, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all those guys are on steroids when they step up on that stage and everything, because you really can't necessarily be 300 plus pounds and be sub 4% body fat unless you're on steroids and everything. So now there is natural bodybuilding, so that's like more like what you'd want to go gear towards for like natural bodybuilding, if that's the road you want to go down. And the same thing like with marathon runners, like you could sit there and become like an expert on running like the marathon and pretty much be like a front runner and be able to run it in like 2 hours or so, like be like a front runner of like the Kenyans. And I know they are stereotypically like usually the winners of the Boston Marathon with like a 2 hour run time or whatever. So like that's something you could do. So like you could in a sense be an expert at like one of those things, or like the same thing like with yoga, you could sit there and be able to like do yoga flows for like 6 days a week and just have it be like nothing or anything. But the question is, like, for like at least for me, I look at it as like, well, I not necessarily could quite possibly be an expert in any single one of those. Now I could really sit there and hyper focus on one of them and become an expert on something, but you're kind of neglecting the other things. So like when you're getting into like strength training, like exclusively for things like powerlifting or like bodybuilding, you're kind of neglecting like your cardio health and your mobility and everything. So, and that same thing goes like the cardio being like the marathon front runner. You're kind of then in a sense sacrificing your overall strength training because you're kind of like hyper focusing on the other end of like so it kind of like ultimately it depends on you, like what you want to go for. And of course you can change things as time goes on. So like for instance, you might have a time where like in your 20s you sit there and you hyper focus on being a power lifter. Maybe in your 30s you transition to bodybuilding. Maybe in your late 30s you like, oh hey look, I want to try out trail running and like being a marathon runner, and then you get into that. But as the time progresses and everything, you might like, oh hey wait, like it's okay to sit there and change and be like, oh, not in a sense like attach your identity to being like, oh I'm a power lifter and only a power lifter, or I'm a marathon runner and only a marathon runner. Take a step back and look at it over the course of a lifetime and be like, okay, how do I approach like overall health with these like three big things, with like mobility with yoga, with strength training geared towards like powerlifting and bodybuilding type styles, and like cardio health. Like okay, maybe like with the marathon runners, maybe not, mix it up between like going for some distance, doing some sprints and everything. Become like a jack of all trades. So that's at least my approach, and I'm like, hey look. And that's the way I go about it now. Is my way the right way? No, it can be, but it quite possibly can't be. But like it all depends on the individual. Now, being like as of this recording, being 43, I try to gear my stuff towards being like a jack of all trades and trying to gear myself towards longevity, because like a couple of like biggest markers that you can see for like a longevity is things like how much, like with us losing muscle mass over the course of our lifetime starting in our 30s. This is why like you want to strength train. And of course VO2 max is also an important marker for like a long-term longevity and health and everything. So That's why cardio is important. So this is why I'm the person that's going to say, look, don't necessarily over the course of your lifetime, you can sit there and hyper focus on stuff to like maybe achieve the goal of getting into a powerlifting meet, stepping on the stage for like bodybuilding, or being that front runner for the marathon runner. But then you kind of have to be able to adapt as you get older and be like, oh, hey, look, maybe I should start mixing it up and trying to try other things and like be able to, in a sense, like, hey, look, can I still do this stuff? Like, could I necessarily be able to bench press like 400 or 500 pounds when I'm 60, 70 years old? Probably not, but can I still bench press a good like 250, 300 pounds when I'm in like my 60s, 70s, 80s? Yeah, that is quite possible. And like, okay, let's gear myself like towards that. And so like, I tend to look at like things like, am I able to still be able to do what I'm doing now in my early 40s, the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years and everything. So again, it's training specificity, and over the course of a lifetime, it's not just one thing, being a powerlifter, marathon runner, bodybuilder, master yogi or whatever. Tend to look at things and like try different things over the course of your life. And like me, I'm going to say try and become more of a jack of all trades, so you can sit there and like if you do get an injury, say like with powerlifting, you're not tied to that identity of being a powerlifter. You can like, oh look, I suffered an injury, I can't necessarily do powerlifting. You are able to shift and not like maybe have that like a negative that as big of a negative impact as would if you tied your whole identity to being one specific thing. So I'm going to come at the approach of, it's probably better to be a jack of all trades and be like an intermediate in like all four of those aspects of bodybuilding, powerlifting, yoga, and cardio, than to be like an expert at one and pretty much like neglect all the others. So again, it all depends on you and how you want to approach it, and of course also approach it over the course of a lifetime and look at the big picture over the course of your whole life of 80, 90 years or something.